Our last speaker of the day is Brian David Johnson, who definitely has one of the coolest jobs around, a futurist, and he works for Intel. As a futurist, his charter is to develop an actionable vision for computing in 2020. His work is called futurecasting. He uses ethnographic field studies, technology research, trend data, and even science fiction to provide Intel with a pragmatic vision of consumers and computing. He speaks and writes extensively about future technologies in articles and scientific papers, as well as in science fiction short stories and novels. What doesn't this guy do? He also has directed 2 feature films and is an illustrator and commissioned painter. His futurecasting work explores what it will feel like to be human in the future. Today, Brian will explore futurism, the computers of tomorrow, and their effect on food. You were wondering when the food part was coming. Please help me welcome Brian David Johnson for his talk, Everything We Love, the Future of Food and Computers.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I do realize, so you know, that I am the guy standing between you and the booze and the food and all the awesome stuff out there. I walked out there and I saw the Ninkasi, and I was like, oh, goodness. So we're going to keep it lively, we're going to keep it moving, because I realize the future's cool, but the food out there is probably cooler. So for Keith and the folks in the booth, I am a pacer, and what I'll do is I'll just call out my slides, and we're going to go pretty quickly. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I'm from Portland. I actually don't spend a lot of time in Portland. My joke is I own a home in Portland, but I actually live in airports and airplanes, because I actually spend most of my life traveling around the world for the work that I do. And so when Eric and the World Travel Association asked me to come and speak, I said yes right away, because anything in my hometown, which I love, which we can talk about later, all the reasons why I love Portland, I always say yes. But then I got the program here, and I started seeing all of the other people on the program, and you kind of get this sinking feeling where you're like, oh my goodness, really? So you've got David and Craig, whose work I'm a huge fan of. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Karen's work, and then I see Steve Jones. Is Steve still here? I don't know if he is. I bought that dude's couch, basically. I love the cheese bar so much. I actually don't know Steve. Steve's like, who is he? But I'm afraid now that, like, when I walk into the cheese bar, he's going to turn to his kid and go, hey, look, it's the college fund. So what I realized is that I got to bring my A game, right? And so how are we going to talk about it? And so this was my original idea, was that we're going to talk about, again, all the things that I love, and hopefully we all love, which is sort of technology and food. That's why I live in Portland. It's great. So I decided to shift it up a little bit and talk about something a little different. Now, before I show you that next slide, so don't go there yet, before I show you that next slide, I don't know if you've ever had this experience in your life, but because of the internet, I think you probably all have. When you get a genius idea, you might take a picture of yourself, you might think a joke, you do it really quickly, and then you send it off, you post it, you send it to Eric and the folks here, and you don't show it to anybody. And then you show it to people, like your spouse, your friends, your trusted circle, and they look at it and go, really? You're going to do that? So I'm afraid to say it, but next slide. Really? So I want to talk about today futurism, futurecasting, sort of what I do, to kind of give you an idea around sort of who I am, but then actually talk a little bit about food. Over the past couple of years, I've been doing some work on the future of food very specifically, but in a very different way that I think you might find kind of exciting and fun. So let's go to my next slide. So if you look at this slide very closely, you'll see it says, I work for a large company and we have a lot of lawyers. Next slide. Okay. I did it, so I'm good. Now, who am I? So as Allison was telling you, I'm Intel's futurist. It's my job to look 10 to 15 years out and model what it'll feel like to be a human. To do that, in my background is I'm a principal engineer at the company, but I also have a design background. And I speak quite a bit to people all over the world, and also I write books about it as well. And so I have this sort of love of, really a deep love for what I do. And when you look at this picture, it pretty much will tell you everything you need to know about me and who I am. So the tall, funny-looking guy is me. The little good-looking guy right there is Arthur. Now, Arthur was the first robot ever created at the University of Essex over in the UK. So like I said, you can pretty much tell everything you need to know about me by looking at this, evidenced by the fact that I went all the way to the United Kingdom and had my picture taken with a 2-decade-old robot. Next slide. I am a geek. I am a huge geek. I love everything science, everything science fiction. And for me, this type of storytelling and these things kind of coming together are incredibly important. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Let's go to our next slide. Now, you may not be able to see this too well in the lights, but for what I do in the future casting, the first step is we have to have a vision for the future, right? You heard David talking about that this morning. You heard Craig talking about it. We have to have a vision, right? And so typically, these are the types of visions that we're shown when we see the future, right? Usually have a good-looking guy or a good-looking girl. Usually have a really cool device. And everything's really streamlined, and everything's really futuristic looking, right? We see this in movies, we see it in advertising. And now I have to tell you, I hate this picture. I can say that because this picture comes from Intel, which, as you can imagine, doesn't make me a lot of friends in the marketing department. The reason why I don't like this picture is I find it intellectually dishonest. When I look at this picture and this vision of the future, I ask myself, where are the baby toys? Where are the pillows? Where are the pictures? Where are the things, the stuff that makes us comfortable? Because for me, I think it's intellectually dishonest, and if we're going to think about a future, we really need to think about a future that is designed for real people, for real human beings. Now, on my next slide, I have a picture of what the future is going to look like, but before we, oh, there it is. There it is. So, what I love about this picture is it's full of stuff, right? It's full of the things that make us human, right? She's got a whole bunch of a mess on top of the chest of drawers. You know, the drawer is open. She's in her bare feet. You know, this is full of the stuff that makes us human. This is comfortable. This is not only the type of future that I want to design, but I want to design a future that is made for people and that I want to live in. Let's go back one slide. I don't want to live in this future because this future looks like prison. Let's go forward a slide. I want to live in this future because it looks comfortable. You probably can't see it, but on that slide, she literally has a pillow that says, chill out. Let's move ahead. So how do we do it? This is the boring part that I'm going to skip over. Next slide. How we do it is a thing called future casting. If you remember nothing else about what I do, please remember I am a futurist who refuses to make predictions. Any futurist or anybody who makes predictions, they're probably doing it because they're trying to sell you something. For me, the future is far too complicated to be able to say it's going to be like this. For me, what I do in the future casting work is to use this mix of social science, computer science, technical data, trend data, and say we roughly think it's going to be like this. We want it to be like this. We don't want it to be like this. So how do we make sure we're moving in the right direction? And I think it's an incredibly important thing to understand that we all have this sort of power over the future. We all have the ability to say, this is what I don't want, and this is the future that I want, and then work to build it. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the geeky part. So if you are a geek, when you saw this slide, you got goosebumps. If you didn't get goosebumps, that's cool, because you're going to have a great life, you're going to have a great social life, you're going to get out, you're going to see a thing called the sun, it's going to be awesome for you. As you can tell, I don't see the sun very much. What we're seeing at Intel is that as computational power, as we move towards the year 2020 and beyond, the size of the intelligence inside of our computers begins to approach zero. The size becomes zero. What that means is that for decades we've had to ask ourselves, can we do it? Can we take a laptop and turn it into a smartphone? Can we take a laptop and turn it into a tablet? Can we get it smaller? But when you get to the year 2020 and beyond, and the size of meaningful computational power gets close to zero, you have to change the question. The question becomes what? What do you want to do with it? Because you can turn anything into a computer. We could turn that seat into a computer. We could turn my jacket into a computer. We could even turn our bodies into a computer. But we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do and why? Why do we want to do it? Next slide. So with all of this happening, with the ability to turn anything into a computer, this is what our chief geek said. So our chief geek is Justin Ratner. He's the geek of all geeks. He's the geek of 100,000 geeks. He's an uber geek. He's very geeky. To have him say this also gives me goosebumps because I am a geek. He said that science and technology have progressed to the point where what we build is constrained only by the limits of our imagination. That's a big deal. Right? You've got a CTO saying that. Not an entrepreneur, not this, but somebody from this sort of massive company that says, no, we have the ability through our science, through our technology, to actually go and build anything. And our biggest deficit is our own imagination. We are not dreaming big enough. Our visions are not big enough and aren't pushing out far enough. And so I've kind of taken this as a challenge. I said, okay, Ratner, let's see what we can do. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that I do as a part of my work, my day job is really working on the chips as a principal engineer, helping to design what it's going to be like. I just finished up working on 2019, and now we're starting to work on 2021. That's the day job. The other part of what I do is this thing we have called the Tomorrow Project. And the Tomorrow Project is really the outside-facing work that I do, where we have conversations about the future. We go to people and say, the future is made every day by the actions of people. The future is not some fixed point on the horizon that we're all sort of running towards, helpless to do anything about. The future is made by what we do. And so if that's true, we need to have conversations about it. The biggest way that you can affect the future is to talk to people about it, to find out what's the future that you want, what's the future that they want, and what are the futures that we want to avoid. And that's really what the Tomorrow Project is about. And we do that through conversations, through science fiction based on science fact. We do webcasts and blogs and events, and really with this idea, and we give it all away for free. The whole idea is just to get out there and get these conversations going. And this is where it starts to tie into the future of food in a really fun way. Let's go to the next slide. So a project that I started about a year and a half ago was looking at science fiction food. I don't know if you guys know these two jokers. Bumpus and Parr in London are all the rage. They have done stuff from like crazy things like making what they call jellies, which us here is Jell-O in the form of Buckingham Palace. Like they do crazy stuff. They make bubble gum. They made a room that you could walk through, and they aerated a gin and tonic. So as you walked through the room, you had a single serving of a gin and tonic. So I thought to myself, whoever said awesome, I got to work with these guys. Let's go to the next slide. So what we started doing, this is actually more what they look like to me, working in their lab. They're crazy. We started thinking about, well, could we use science fiction food, almost like a science fiction prototype? We all know food is narrative, travel is narrative. Well, what if that narrative became science fiction, right? If we can use science fiction based on science fact to really think about the type of futures that we want, why wouldn't we do it with food? I don't know how they did it, but they got Cuisinart, or KitchenAid, to do this event. Let's go to our next slide. So they had this big event where we took a menu of food. And I can't give it all to you, but I'll be around afterwards and I can send you to the website. But we use these science fiction stories and these science fiction ideas to take food, and they actually got the food. Things like the quadruped dish of the day from a Douglas Adams story, which was literally steak tartare, but in the story, the steak walks itself around and sells itself to you. Like the cow comes up and goes, look at my lovely rump, would you like to slice it off? It makes you go, whoa, wait a minute, wait a minute. And then there's another one. Do I have any science fiction fans in the house? Yeah, this is Portland. I love it here. Another one from Douglas Adams, which I really liked, is called it's a cocktail, the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster, which is the alcoholic equivalent of a mugging. The effect of which is like having your brains bashed out by a slice of lemon wrapped around a gold brick. You start thinking, really, should I drink this? Now, for the science fiction fans, what food probably popped in your head? If we're doing science fiction food and you're feeding it to people and making them think about what you're eating, what food do you think was probably the most popular? Close. Let's go to the next slide. Humans and reformatted protein. Go forward one. Soylent Green. Now, this was what was interesting to me, and where things get a little dicey and dangerous, which is this Portland, and that's fine, but it get a little weird, because it was pea puree, mint, pea shoots, and smoked human hair oil. So, you're in London. It's very posh. You can't see this very posh lady, but she's got her mouth open. She's going to eat some. Technically, you are eating humans. And so they walked up to you, and so as a way of confronting culture, food culture, where something's grown, where it's sourced, what you're doing, for me, there was nothing more powerful than creating science fiction food and then saying to people, do you want to put this in your mouth? See, it's one thing, of course, and for you folks that have been in food and travel, this, you'll kind of, well, that makes kind of sense. But I can tell you, to most people, it freaked them out. And it started having conversations that you wouldn't normally have about the things that we talk about here, that we talked about today. But it was very visceral. And that was the thing to me, as a futurist, that got me very excited. Because I can go to people and I can talk on stage and I can even write science fiction stories. But when you create a fiction, which even when the guys were doing this, they actually had to say to themselves, will we go to jail? It was true. And they even said in some of them, especially with the one that's like the equivalent of a mugging, the cocktail that's getting mugged, the guys had to ask themselves, should we do this? And that's the good stuff, right? That's where you start those conversations about the future and the future of food and the future of narrative and, I would argue, travel. So when people were putting this in their mouths, it sort of gave them this pause. Let's go to the next slide. So as I've been talking to people, and I talk about where the future is going, and I talk about compute moving to zero, and things getting really small, and ever smarter computers, and big AI, and big data, and all the things that you've heard of that all the geeks and the nerds talk about, right? What I normally tell people is they start saying, well, will the computers take our jobs? Will they, get so smart that they will take the majority of what they're doing? And usually my answer to that is yes, actually. There's a great article this week in Wired magazine written by Kevin Kelly that says that the robots will take our jobs, and we want them to. Now, you're all a little bit scared, but don't worry, it gets better. But there is something in the year 2023 that there's still something that a computer will not be able to do. Let's go forward. I know, right? Yeah. Shameless. Believe me, my mother's very proud. I get up on the stage and show people pictures of toilets. No, it's that a computer won't be able to clean a toilet. It won't. We'll have computers that can perform surgery. We'll have computers that can write newspaper stories. We'll have computers that can do tons and tons of stuff, but it won't be able to clean a toilet. And this is my sort of upstart way of saying we need to start thinking and re-evaluating what occupations we hold to be important and how we train people for those jobs, right? We would normally think, oh, stockbroker, definitely. Nope, we'll get an artificial intelligence. We will take care of that. But not this. Let's go to our next slide. And not this either. By the way, I just Googled cooking, and this was the first thing that came up. The preparation of food, the narrative of travel, people interacting with people, people putting the future in their mouth is not going to change. Now, technology will make it better. It will make us more sustainable. It will make us more efficient. We'll be able to do a lot of things, but ultimately, technology is only important. Technology only matters when it touches the lives of people. Ones and zeros, big data, artificial intelligence, iPads, iPhones, computers, whatever, none of it matters. None of it matters until it comes into contact with people and it makes their lives better. It makes them healthier, it makes them more efficient, it connects them with their family, it educates them. That's the bar when I'm doing my future casting that I think about, and that's why food was so important to me, because that you cannot replace. You cannot replace the human element. Now, again, technology is a tool, and we can use it to do some great stuff. And that's, I think, where the vision part comes in. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So, back to my embarrassing picture. With that, there actually is research going on to really blur the lines. There is research going on that we're going to be able to make technology in the next 10 to 15 years where we will actually be able to ingest electronics. They're actually making silicon technology, and they're making devices that are made out of silicon and silk and magnesium that you'll actually be able to eat a computer. Now, that might sound a little bit freaky, but if you've got a really bad stomach problem, you have no idea what's going on, being able to swallow a tiny little analyzer that has a little piece of Wi-Fi in it that then can send out what's going on down there is really important. Right? Being able to, with the vitamins, being able to have certain vitamins come in. And, oh, and by the way, the magnesium in it has there's less magnesium in these little circuits than there is in a multivitamin. So as you start thinking about it, and we think about the future of food, it's not only thinking about science fiction stuff. We're getting a lot closer to being able to bring technology and food together in a really interesting way, and in a way that I argue can make a pretty dramatic change. Let's go to our next slide. So as I said before, it is incredibly important that we have a vision for the future. In the work that I do and how I think about the future, we always have to remember the future is incredibly important, and you can't punt. Right? You can't punt. It's not something you can wait for the other person to do. Right? If the future is made by people every day, if the future is made by the actions of people, then the future is made by everybody here. Now, I take this incredibly seriously, and being at Intel, I find it a very big deal. And so I had to ask myself, how do we do that? And I traveled around and studied it for a year, and I came up with this. Let's move forward. That how we change the future is we change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in. If you can change the image, if you can have a vision for the future, and you can share it with other people, we can make very big, meaningful change. And we do that through conversations. We do that through the business that we do. Let's move forward. So I have a question for you. As I've told you before, that we are in control of our future. We are the ones who build the future. Literally the future of food, of tourism, of hospitality, of all the folks, and especially the who's from out of town. Specifically for you people who came here, you're going to do something. So here's my question. The future is in your hands, right? We all build the future. So if the future is in your hands, what are you going to do with it? Right? It's not good enough, as we were saying before, to do good business. It's not good enough to succeed. I even argue it's not good enough just to remain sort of local and sustainable. Ultimately, we need to make the lives of people better. And if we can hold that as a bar, if we can have a vision for the future and hold that as a bar, it's incredibly important. Now, my last slide, don't go there yet, comes from a really quick story, and Allison's going to come and pull me off. But it's worth it! I believe. When I was coming up in industry, I was a speechwriter. And a guy I used to write speeches for always made me put a picture of dogs playing poker in all of his presentations, always. I got really good at it. Pictures of dogs playing poker on TVs, pictures on the wall. Never asked why. I was really young. Finally, we were separating, and I finally got up the guts to ask him. I said, so why did I have to put a picture of dogs playing poker in every single presentation? And he kind of smiled at me and said, Brian, everybody loves a picture of dogs playing poker. Why wouldn't you put a picture of dogs playing poker? So I've taken on that tradition, changed it a little bit. So in every presentation that I give, I don't have a picture of dogs playing poker. What I do have is a picture of animals using technology. And the longer you look at this, the more freaked out you're going to get. Let's move forward, and I will say thank you very much.
Okay, we are running a bit long, but I will just make the decision to take one. Are you going to be with us?
I'll be outside having an coffee.
Okay, great. So you will have a chance to catch up with Brian, David, afterwards. So one question to squeeze in before we wrap up. Okay, you and the checks.
When you talk about the vision of the future, and we have to decide how we want to get there, and you use the phrase, we have to have that conversation, which is a word that's being used a lot at the moment in Washington and various places about we have to have this conversation. But who decides whose vision it is? And it doesn't seem to me that people are making a lot of progress having conversation. So, and my vision may be completely different than your vision. So how does that work?
Well, I'm a big fan of differing visions, right? Because and I'm a principal engineer and a systems architect, and I'll get all geeky. We'll nerd out for a minute. The more diversity you have at the beginning of a design of a system, and actually a conversation is actually a complex system, the more diversity you have at the beginning, the better product you have at the end. The more diverse inputs you come up with actually means that when you get to the end of it, you've actually assured that it's going to be more successful. So that's usually even my technical argument. There's lots of things that go out there to actually push for that. Now, who decides about the conversation? Well, right, this is the tricky thing, right? Part of it is, especially with the internet, and especially with the access that we have to people, is I'm an optimist. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm like a raging optimist, right? Because I think the future is far too important to be pessimistic about it. So I will always bright side you. So I apologize, I'm going to be optimistic. What I have found, simply as a futurist, sort of as this sort of one guy kind of going around the world talking to people, is that if you start having conversations and people own that fact that they are responsible for their future, I mean, especially if you have kids, if you have business, if you're involved in your community, everybody, to one level or not, one level or the other, they build their future. They have to own that fact. Most people sit back and sort of let the future happen to them. That kills me. You can't be passive, right? You have to be active. And I think so many people, that's the problem, is that people click back and become passive. Because in so many ways that we've seen, especially on the internet, again, I'm a geek because I'll go back to that, but it's a great way to track it, is that when people start to feel that power and they start having those conversations, it has a huge effect. And it's that you one conversation leads to another conversation, other people talking, and now with this communication medium, it really does allow us to make a pretty massive change. And we've seen it all over the world. Sometimes the conversations, you can agree with them or not, but at least those conversations are happening. It's very hard to shut them off.
That's a very great, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. It's a good segue for talking about work groups. Thank you very much, Brian
Thanks, everybody.
Johnson.